Chapter 3 Grandfather's Errand. Sunday morning was gray and bitterly cold. Felicity kept her hands in her mitts and muff as the family walked to church. She held tightly to something special she tucked inside her muff to give to Elizabeth if she had the chance. She looked for Elizabeth in the churchyard, but did not see her. The service had just begun when a whisper swept through the church. Felicity looked around to see Mrs. Cole leading Elizabeth and her sister Annabel down the aisle. Mrs. Cole held her head high. Elizabeth's face was hidden by the hood of her blue cloak. Felicity could not catch her eye. After the service, the Coles left the church quickly. Felicity hurried after them. "Elizabeth," she called. "Wait!" Elizabeth turned around, but Mrs. Cole took her firmly by the hand and pulled her away. Felicity ran to catch up. "Elizabeth," she said, "take this." From her muff she pulled the sampler of stitches she had finished last spring. There was a bluebird on it, just the color of Elizabeth's cloak. And under the bluebird it said, "Faithful friends forever be." Felicity thrust the sampler into Elizabeth's hand. Elizabeth looked at it and gave Felicity a sad smile before her mother hurried her away. Felicity felt Grandfather's hand on her shoulder. Together they watched Elizabeth disappear. "I hate to see Elizabeth so unhappy," said Felicity. "I wish I could break open the jail. I wish I could smash the door down and help Mr. Cole escape. I want to do something, anything to help." "I'm sure you do," said Grandfather. "I do too." Icy rain fell all that day, all night long, and on into the next morning. The next day the ground was slick and the trees groaned under the coating of ice. Mrs. Merriman would not allow the children to go out of doors. They played together in front of the parlor fire. Felicity sat on the floor with baby Polly in her lap. It was comforting to hold Polly's warm little body and spin the top for her and listen to her coo with delight. "Felicity," said Mother, "have you seen Grandfather this morning?" "No, Mother," said Felicity, "not since breakfast." "Oh dear," fretted Mrs. Merriman. "He's gone out in this weather. It will make his cold worse." She looked out the window at the freezing rain. Why didn't he wait until the rain stopped? What urgent errand could he have had? Felicity could see her mother was very worried. "I don't know, Mother," she said. "Grandfather didn't say anything to me." Mrs. Merriman grew more and more worried as she waited for Grandfather to return. It was almost dinner time before they heard him come in the door. Mrs. Merriman ran to greet him. "Where have you been?" she fussed. "You're soaked to the skin. I'll take your cloak. Go and sit by the fire." Grandfather sank into the chair by the fire. His face was pale. He sounded tired when he said, "Felicity, come here." Felicity put Polly in her cradle and went over to stand next to Grandfather's chair. "Yes, Grandfather," she said. Grandfather coughed and cleared his throat. "My business today had to do with you," he said, "and your friend Elizabeth and her family. I went to see her father today." "You went to the jail?" asked Felicity. "Yes," said Grandfather. He shivered. "What a dismal, dreadful place it is. I spoke to Mr. Cole. He is a fine gentleman. After our conversation, I went to the authorities." Mother gasped. Grandfather went on to say, "Now that the King's royal governor is gone, Williamsburg is governed by the Committee of Safety. The chairman of the committee is Edmund Pendleton." Grandfather paused for breath. His eyes had a bit of their old twinkle in them. "Well," he said, "I've known Pendleton since he was a young pup. I went straight to him and I said, 'Stop this nonsense, Pendleton. Release Mr. Cole. I have his word as a gentleman that he has not caused any trouble. And if you need another loyalist to fill Mr. Cole's place in jail, take me.'" Grandfather laughed so hard he made himself cough. When he could speak again, he said, "I wish you could have seen Pendleton's face. It was purple as a turnip. He mumbled and chattered about how being a loyalist was treasonous to Virginia. He said he would have to present the matter to the Committee of Safety, and then speak to Mr. Cole himself. He blustered and fussed, but in the end he had to admit that Mr. Cole had done nothing wrong, so he would try to have him released." "Does that mean Mr. Cole will go home?" asked William. "Yes," said Grandfather. "I believe he will go home." "Hooray!" shouted Nan and William. "Oh, Grandfather!" exclaimed Felicity. "Thank you. Elizabeth will be so happy." She kissed his cheek. "I'm happy too." Mother's eyes were full of love as she looked at Grandfather. "It's a fine thing you've done this morning," she said. "I hope it hasn't been too much for you." "I do feel a bit feverish," admitted Grandfather. "I'd like to rest now. Don't worry about my dinner. I'm more tired than hungry." Felicity helped him out of his chair. He leaned on her as he went slowly up the stairs to his chamber. He seemed worn out and frail, but as Felicity was closing his door behind her, she heard him chuckle and say to himself, "Pendleton, ha! Purple as a turnip he was." She smiled and skipped down the stairs. Grandfather had said everything right. After dinner, Felicity asked her mother, "May I go see Elizabeth now?" "No, I don't think you should," said Mother. "This has been very hard on Mrs. Cole. It may take some time for her to feel friendly toward any family that supports the Patriots. We must wait and see how she feels about your friendship with Elizabeth. You had better wait for Mrs. Cole to allow Elizabeth to come to you. Be patient." Felicity was disappointed. She was aching to see her friend. She decided to go to Father's store. Its cheery bustle always made her happy, and she wanted to tell Father what Grandfather had done for Mr. Cole. Felicity took the long way around to the store so that she could walk past Elizabeth's house. She stopped in front. Sleet stung her eyes as she looked up at Elizabeth's window. She couldn't see any movement inside, just something propped on the windowsill. Felicity squinted to see better. It was a needlework frame holding the sampler Felicity had given to Elizabeth. Felicity wanted to dance for happiness. She knew Elizabeth meant the message for her. Faithful friends forever be. The next day, a pale winter sun shone, but it wasn't warm enough to melt the brittle ice coating the trees. Felicity was up early. As she led Penny from her stall to exercise her, Ben came down from his room above the stable. "Good morning," he said. "How is Penny today?" "She's fine," said Felicity. "Father says I shouldn't ride her. He thinks her foal will be born quite soon." Ben followed along as Felicity walked Penny around the stable yard. "Well," he said with a grin, "I don't know much about foals, but Penny is so big, I'd say your father is right." "I'm glad you'll be here when it's born," said Felicity. "If you had run away to be a soldier in General Washington's army, you'd never have known about Penny's foal." Ben looked serious. "I promised your father I'd stay at the store until I'm 18, he said. "I won't break my promise, but when that day comes, I'll go fight with the Patriots. I won't change my mind about that. Not ever." Felicity sighed. "You're just as stubborn as Grandfather," she said. "He'll never change his mind about the king. He'll always be a loyalist." "Your grandfather and I will never agree," Ben said. He and Felicity led Penny back to the stable and into her stall. "But I do respect him." "I do too," agreed Felicity. "I'm so happy that he helped Mr. Cole. Grandfather made everything all right again, just as it was before." "No, Lissy," said Ben sadly. "Not even your grandfather could do that." But Felicity ran ahead of Ben to the house, so she did not hear him. "Where's Grandfather?" she asked as she sat at the breakfast table. "The fever is much worse," said Mother, "and 'tis hard for him to breathe. Rose has mixed some molasses, vinegar, and butter for him to drink to ease the pain in his throat. Father and Mr. Galt, the apothecary, are with him now." Ben, Felicity, Nan, and William looked at each other. They knew by the way Mother spoke that Grandfather was very ill. After breakfast, Ben left for the store. The children went into the parlor. They played quietly with Polly. Soon after Father and the apothecary left, Mother came into the parlor. Felicity could tell she had been crying. "Felicity," Mother said, "Grandfather is asking for you." Felicity hurried up the stairs and tiptoed into Grandfather's shadowy chamber. Grandfather was lying very still. His breathing was slow and his skin was ashy gray. Felicity stood next to him and took his hand. Grandfather opened his eyes. "Don't try to talk, Grandfather," Felicity said softly. "You just lie there. I'll read to you." Grandfather closed his eyes again. Felicity read from the Bible. "The Lord is my shepherd," she read. "Therefore I lack nothing. He shall feed me in a green pasture, and lead me forth beside the waters of comfort." Felicity looked at Grandfather. "That part always makes me think of your plantation," she said. "I imagine lying in the green grass in the big pasture on the hill on a sunny day. And the river is comforting. It's peaceful the way it flows along so smoothly. You'll be back there soon, Grandfather. You'll feel fine once you get back to your plantation." Grandfather reached up and stroked her cheek. "Dear Lissy," he whispered. He sighed and went to sleep. Felicity kissed his forehead and then tiptoed away. Days passed, and Grandfather grew weaker and weaker. One night, after Felicity and Nan went to bed in the chamber they were sharing while Grandfather visited, Felicity heard voices and saw light moving in the passage outside their door. She thought the apothecary had probably come back again. Nan woke up too. They lay in the dark, listening. In a little while, the door opened and Mother came in. She put the candlestick on the table, sat on the bed, and took each of them by the hand. "My dear girls," she said in a shaky voice, "your grandfather died just a few minutes ago." Her voice faltered, and then she said softly, "He loved you both very, very much. God rest his soul." Nan cried bitterly. Felicity was silent as she clung to her mother. Her sorrow was too great to be eased by crying. Mother sat with Nan and Felicity until the sky lightened to gray and the last star disappeared.